So good morning and welcome to the European Medicines Agency. My name is Noël Batillon. I'm the EMEA Deputy Executive Director, sorry for the lapsus. And together with my co-chair, Christine Rautsep, who is the head of the Estonian agency, we will try to make sure that today's workshop will come to a good end and that we can have very interesting discussions on an increasingly important topic, availability of medicines. We yesterday had an already preparatory, if I may call it like that, technical meeting with pharmaceutical industry, and you will hear more about that today. So today we are gathering with all the different stakeholders who are interested in this particular topic. First, some health and safety recommendations. So in case of evacuation, you should leave the room immediately. Either you use the red or the green fire exit, and we will give you more guidance in case that is necessary. Also to mention that this workshop will be recorded and will be broadcasted live. If you would like to speak, press enter on the control panel screen, and also state your name and affiliation before speaking in order to help participants who are following through the live broadcast. And also please turn off your microphone when you finish speaking. We will break for lunch at 12:15, and because of the very short time frame, lunch will be served for those who are physically present, of course, outside this meeting room. I'll give the floor now to Christine Rautsep in order to present to you the workshop objectives.
Thank you, and very warm welcome to everybody also from me. My name is Christine Rautsep. I'm Director General of the Estonian State Agency of Medicines, and together with Noel, I'm co-chairing the task force on availability of medicines. Talking about today's meeting, first of all, I would like to say some words about the background. Probably everybody in this room is familiar with it, no doubt to say, but the shortages of medicinal products are a growing issue of concern in EU and also globally. We hear it every day on news, and as regulators we see it in our agencies, and of course everybody here knows that it makes a lot of problems. And all the network of regulators is confronted with supply challenges and shortages, and under concern are both new but also well-established medicines. So heads of Medicines Agency and European Medicines Agency have recognized it as an important area and of great concern, and we know that it is affecting all the stakeholder groups. So the task force has been set up to develop and coordinate the necessary actions to help to guarantee uninterrupted supply of medicines. And the objective of the workshop today is to inform all the stakeholders about the task force activities and about the expected deliverables. We will talk also about Brexit impact. We would like to update all the stakeholders on progress with deliverables and identify areas of agreement as well as areas for further discussion. And of course, we hope very much that everybody here will share the perspectives and initiatives on how to mitigate and help to avoid the shortages in European Union. This is all in the beginning, and I propose now to go to inform you about yesterday.
Thank you very much, Christine. We will, of course, have much more in-depth discussions today, but we thought it was useful for those participants who were not participating at yesterday's more technical meeting with pharmaceutical industry, that we would give you an update on what has been discussed and what also is going to be the main issues, I would say, from the industry side that will be raised today. And of course, there will then be ample opportunity in order to have in-depth discussions with all the stakeholders. In fact, if you look at yesterday, which was a very intense meeting, I have to say, it shows the complexity of the issue. I mean, we know that availability of medicines is complex, and if you follow the media, also recent media coverage, not only in relation to the impact of Brexit on supply of medicines, but more in general, there have been several articles published over the last couple of days which demonstrate once again what a complex issue availability of medicines is. And that was once again demonstrated yesterday during the discussion during the technical meeting. We focused on a number of aspects, such as the proposed definition for a medicine shortage, and of course this will be further debated today. There was a general consensus that a harmonization of the definition is welcome. Industry highlighted some areas for further clarification, such as a minimum duration of shortage as a trigger for reporting, to provide a definition of risk of shortage. If we talk about critical medicines, what is in fact a critical medicine, and can we find a harmonized view on that? We then had also discussions about how to notify, because if you would like to, in a timely and in an adequate way, to manage shortage notifications, then notifications have to be made in advance, but that is easier said than done. So how should we do that? And there was common agreement that we should keep it simple as possible. So reporting procedures should be simplified. We should avoid unnecessary duplication. There was a demand for a single format of reporting for all member states and also for the European Medicines Agency. And there were also some concerns raised. How should we try to avoid an unnecessary increase in notifications? So can we find some measures to manage this? And some ideas that were floated yesterday related to risk-based reporting based on risk to patients and access to therapy, possibly starting with a pilot with a proportionate and balanced implementation period. Also to distinguish between medicinal products that have alternatives and those that don't have alternatives. There was also a debate about the use of multilingual packages and how they can avoid availability problems by facilitating transfer of medicines with the appropriate language version of the package leaflet to countries experiencing shortages. And there are some examples in the EU where this is currently, where we have these multilingual packages. Then we went on to discuss the impact of Brexit on availability of human medicines. So only human medicines, and in fact yesterday, to be more precise, we targeted centrally authorized products where EMA presented its latest assessment of industry's preparedness for Brexit on the basis of the most recent survey that we did with all marketing authorization holders for centrally authorized products, and we also elaborated on our approach to identify medicines at risk of shortage. This session offered an opportunity for industry to give an update on its preparedness and highlight its concerns, and of course this will be further debated today. I will not go into the more specific comments and concerns that were raised yesterday in relation to Brexit preparedness, since they will be I'm sure further reflected upon at this workshop today. Then there were some various reflections from industry stakeholders to build on best practices. In terms of monitoring of shortage at an EU level, the potential to establish a list of high-risk products, so life-saving with no possible substitutes, products with high risk to patients and difficult to replace, products with high risk and easy to replace. On a case-by-case basis, ensure for all these categories reasonable and appropriate security measures, incentives. We even were talking about penalties in case there would be a failure to supply. Then there was some discussion about the need for flexibility from a regulatory point of view. Consider risk to patients and allow a pragmatic approach in defined circumstances. Facilitate post-approval changes to controlled but fast procedures to avoid shortages. Flexibility to accept different pack sizes at national level based on marketing authorizations. Flexibility to accept multilingual packages, and here the possibility to use electronic leaflets as a solution was raised. And perhaps also look at incentives, such as incentives for medicines who are essential and low priced, so for instance lower variation fees or a flat fee. So you'll see that there was a wide range of issues being discussed. Also quite a lot of proposals which merit further discussion, not only at today's workshop but also beyond. It shows you once again, as I said at the beginning, the sheer complexity of the issue at stake. And of course, we are very interested in hearing the viewpoints from all the stakeholders on these and other issues that will be discussed today, and also then agree on what could be the best way forward in order to tackle this. We also would like to take this opportunity to say that we have to do some expectation management. This is a problem which exists for a long period of time. We will not be able to sort all this out in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months. So what is important is that we try to come up with an action plan which is robust, where perhaps we can have some quick wins, which will show that the network as a whole, but the network not only with regulatory authorities, but with all the other stakeholders, pharmaceutical industry, which are critical in this, but at the end of the day, patients, because we should not forget we are all patients at the end of the day, so we all have a vested interest that we can minimize as much as possible shortage of supply. So that action plan, we can have a look at it, how to best draw that up. As I said, we have a number of quick wins. Try to keep it as simple as possible, because otherwise we will be lost in details and we will gain nothing at the end of the day. So we certainly will do, Christine, myself, and the task force, a more in-depth reflection, taking into account the outcome of these 2 days in order to see what will be the best way forward. So perhaps here I would like to stop in terms of feedback from the meeting and some general considerations. And we will move on now to session 1, which is a general session about availability of authorized medicines, setting the scene. So we have a number of speakers. Agnès Mathieu-Mendes from the European Commission, Francisco Blanco from the World Health Organization, François Houillet representing the patient's view from Eurordis, and Elisabeth de Vries from the European Society for Medical Oncology. Each speaker will have 10 to 12 minutes, so we'll watch that carefully. We will allow some questions for clarification, but we will not have an in-depth debate, so we can do that later on. So I give the floor now first to Agnès Mathieu in order to give the European Commission's viewpoint.
Thank you, Noel. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today and discuss a very important topic for all of us, namely the problems surrounding the availability of medicines. These problems have a significant impact on public health for all member states in the European Union. During these last years, we have also noticed some differences in the level of timely access of medicine between the member states. This increases health inequalities and has a strong negative impact for patients. Before proceeding with this topic, I would like to thank the HMA and EMA for organizing this unique workshop, which has brought all stakeholders together. I think the HMA-EMA task force provides in itself a good platform to discuss this long-standing and major issue. So, we have supported the HMA task force from the beginning, and we will continue to do so in the coming years. This is the reason why I'm very pleased to be here, and I take this opportunity to also present the Commission activities to improve accessibility and availability of medicines. Let's start with the Commission action on shortage of medicine, which is one element of this broader problem of availability. As you can see on this chart, the complexity of the distribution chain is important. We do not have only a marketing authorization holder, a distributor, and a pharmacist. We can have up to 20 actors in the distribution chain. This complex distribution chain, in general, in most of the case, deliver the medicine to the patients. In most of the case, it's going well, but unfortunately, there are situations where it does not work well and where the patients does not receive the treatment. The cause of shortage is multifactorial, but nevertheless, we have noticed that often it's due to manufacturing problems in the API manufacturer or the finished products manufacturer, or because products are disappearing in the supply chain. It can be linked to parallel export, or because the company does not provide enough product for the market. There are quotas. So there are insufficient stock to cover the needs of patients. And you can have economic reason where a company decides that there is no commercial interest to pursue the distribution. So in May this year, the Commission organized a meeting to discuss this topic with experts from the member states. This is also a response to the call of the Council and the Parliament, which is also concerned by the problem of access to medicine. And they asked the Commission to look at the pharmaceutical legislation, in particular 2 articles of the legislation. The first article is the Article 81, which obliges the marketing authorization holders and the distributors to ensure a continuous supply to respond to the demands of patients. And the second article is Article 23, which obliges the marketing authorization holders to notify at least 2 months in advance an interruption of supply of medicinal product. So the aim of the meeting that we have was to exchange good practice between the member states, to clarify the expectation of the authorities, and to help the member states to implement and enforce the legal obligation. We also adopted a paper which clarified the obligation. And to summarize some element of this paper, more or less for the marketing authorization holders, what is expected from the NCA is that the marketing authorization holder ensure sufficient supply of product in adequate quantities to cover the demands from patients. What does it mean in practice? It means that the marketing authorization holder has to provide sufficient stock to the distributors and the pharmacists to make sure that the needs of patients are covered. We have also highlighted that some situations are particularly dangerous, and companies should be vigilant when there is only one supplier of active substance, when there is only one line of production of the finished product, when there is no alternative, because when there is no alternative, it is clear that the company has like a monopoly situation. He has the market. So if there is any problem, we can have a serious consequence for public health, where we will not easily mitigate the risk. Another element that we discussed was the limit of responsibility. So practically, it's true that if a company used to deliver every month 10,000 packs of product, we expect that next month they produce this amount. But we have to be realistic. We cannot blame a company if certain products have been exported to another EU member states. Or if there is an increased demand. We discussed vaccine yesterday. We cannot produce vaccine overnight. We cannot, the company cannot be blamed because from one month to another, there is an increased interest to increase immunization and to have new orders of vaccines. So there are certain limits of responsibility, but which of course have to be looked on a case-by-case basis by the member states. We also discussed the Article 23, which is the notification procedure. In fact, there is a notification obligation at least 2 months in advance. We noticed that certain member states ask much more than 2 months in advance. One member state asks up to 1 year in advance. This period is important because it allows the member states to have a good discussion and plan alternative treatments for the benefit of patients. We discuss also that in this notification it's good to clarify the amount of sales volumes and the volume of prescription. But overall, we didn't enter into the technicalities of the notification or the definition. So I'm very pleased that in the context of the task force today, we are progressing on those two aspects and to use these opportunities to have the best outcome with the system of notification. We also discussed the rules for export restrictions. So some member states are suffering from shortage due to export, so parallel trade. Parallel trade is a legal form of trade, so you cannot ban completely parallel trade. But we help the member states to introduce the national provision, which are proportionate based on the risk of shortage, and to allow them they can ensure a high level of public health protection without avoiding a complete ban of parallel trade. But let me continue with the other activities of the Commission that we have to tackle this problem of availability. Let's continue with health technology assessment, or HTA. So HTA is a powerful tool that provides to policymakers evidence-based information for assessing the added value of medicine or medical product. This information is important for the reimbursement decision and to formulate the right health policy. The Commission has started a cooperation on health technology assessment a long time ago. We have been cooperating on that for the last 20 years. But it's time to see how we can have a permanent and sustainable cooperation at EU level. So last January, we at the Commission adopted a legal proposal to put on the table for a system of sustainable EU cooperation beyond 2022. This responds to the call of European countries, the European Parliament, and also interested parties for ultimately for the benefit of patients. So this legal proposal is now in the Council and the Parliament, and we hope to have an adoption by the end of 2019. This HTA cooperation has the ambition to improve business predictability, promote investment in innovation, and ultimately lead to improvement of the availability of innovative health technology for the patients in the member states. Let's carry on with the Commission expert group on safe and timely access to medicine for patients, the STAMP. The STAMP is another project of the Commission. It's an expert group which provides advice to the European Commission in relation to the implementation of the pharmaceutical legislation. We had a meeting last June where we discussed topics such as repurposing of established medicine, activities related to real-world data. We also discussed a study on incentive. And to go a little bit more into the details of this study on incentive, one common ambition of the Commission is to ensure that the EU regulatory environment deliver patient-driven innovation. So the regulatory environment for the moment has a lot of incentives which are crucial for innovation and for attracting research in the European Union, with the ultimate goal to have new treatments for patients. Nevertheless, we wanted to see how those incentives are functioning. And in May 2018, the Commission published the result of an external study which analyzed all these incentives and rewards coming from the regulatory frameworks. This study was conducted in response to the Commission Single Market Initiative to improve the patent system, but also following the call of the Council, because the Council wanted to know what is the impact of those incentives on access and availability of medicine. So the Council wanted to know if the market exclusivity, the data protection period have an impact on the access to patients. The study overall gives an overview of all incentive available. The paper indicates that the average time protection period decreased over time from 15 years to 13 years. But at the same time, this study also showed that more medical products are going faster in larger and wealthier countries. So it means in practice that not all medicine are going in all European countries, not at the same speed. And it leads overall to health inequalities in the European Union. So this study is an external output, and it will complement also other studies that are currently ongoing on the pediatric and the orphan legislation. Finally, I would like to end with the topic of Brexit. Brexit will have consequences for businesses and the work of the medicine regulatory network. We are aware of the challenge for industry. The Commission, EMA, the national competent authorities, also marketing authorization holders, I think we have a collective responsibility to ensure preparedness of the system, to make sure that we can continue to deliver the expectation and the needs of patients. So the Commission has worked closely with EMA and HMA to prepare very extensive Q&A documents to guide all players involved regarding the impact of Brexit, and also to highlight the changes that are required to avoid any impact on the availability of product to patients. With this Q&A, marketing authorization holders for human and veterinary medicine are reminded of all legal repercussions and all the elements that need to be considered once the UK becomes a third country. But I think it's really important that we work all together on that. So to conclude, the availability of medicine has a significant impact on public health of all EU member states. The variation in availability between the member states increase health inequalities, and it has a negative impact for our patients. The Commission fully supports the work of the HMA and EMA task force. We have been involved in several initiatives related to accessibility, including the Q&A documents with regard to Brexit. The plan is to continue with this work in the future. Nevertheless, I think a high level of commitment from all players is crucial to make sure that we have better and equal availability of medicines. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to the good discussion today, and we will be listening carefully to your ideas and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Is there any point for clarification? If so, please state your name and your affiliation. Yes, please. Sorry, you have to speak. You have to push the button. Have to speak in the mic. Yeah.
Siegfried Schwarze, European AIDS Treatment Group. When you mentioned causes of shortages, I was quite surprised that you didn't mention political problems. Time and time again, we see medicine shortages because governments fail to recognize the demand of a certain medicine or just don't order enough from the pharmaceutical company, for example.
Okay, we have noted this down. I propose that we discuss this in the discussion round later on. Any other point for clarification at this stage? If not, then we move to the next speaker. So Francisco Blanco, who will provide the viewpoint of WHO.
Can I have the Agnes?
Sorry. Yeah. Good.
I think I do not order enough. I think you take note of the point. We will not okay.
Does it work?
Okay.
Does it work?
Yes, I think so. Good morning, everybody. My name is Francisco Blanco. I work in the World Health Organization in the Department of Essential Medicines and Health Products. First of all, we want to thank the organizers for inviting us. We have been recently in the context of working on a World Health Assembly resolution on availability and access and shortage to medicines and vaccines. We have been engaged with many member states, consulting on different aspects of the management and the capacity needed for systems to be reliant and able to mitigate the impact. So this gives us a great opportunity to learn of the developments in the European Union, where there has been a lot of advancement, and then very much translate also this experience and knowledge to other countries. Access to medicines is part of a global commitment under the Sustainable Development Goals, and very clearly under the SDG 3 in Target 3.8 that aims at ensuring universal health coverage. It specifically says that a key element is the access to safe, effective, quality and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for all. For WHO, the overall mission under the current approved global program of work that will go from 2019 to 2023 is very clearly threefold. One is the promote health, second, to keep the world safe, and third, to serve the vulnerable. For that, it has set three main goals. One is to achieve 1 billion more people enjoying better health and well-being. In relation to health emergencies, is to provide also protection to an additional 1 billion people, and for universal health coverage, that 1 billion more people are benefiting from health coverage. And an integral part of the health coverage is access, and one of the main challenges in achieving it is the persistent barriers to health services, to access to health services, but then also to access to the products that are needed for delivery. The continuous supply of quality safe and effective, affordable medicines is essential, as we said, to achieve the targets of WHO and to serve the constitution of WHO. But this also is one of the building blocks of every well-functioning health system. It's also indispensable to respond to outbreaks and health emergencies. And we will see also how WHO sees this effort. There is, in the work on access, WHO has two distinctive functions. One is a facilitating role, so that is supporting the needs for innovation, uptake of innovation evaluations, and then reinforcing the capacity to select, to use, to procure, and to manage the supply system in countries to increase access. But then there is also a guardian role, something that is seen as a public good for the world, and that is really the strengthening the regulatory capacity of countries, also ensuring the practices in relation to regulation and supply chain management to ensure the quality of products that are reaching the patient, and then also that there are efficient systems to secure health gains. In relation to shortages and availability, in 2016 at the World Health Assembly there was a clear agenda point in relation to shortages, which led to recommendations to member states to build strong systems in relation to visibility of the supply chain, engagement with stakeholders, appropriate measures in relation to the financing, to the procurement that can mitigate shortages, and then also prioritize the health needs of the more vulnerable, and promotion of collaboration among countries and international cooperation in this field. It also called upon manufacturers and supply chain actors to contribute to the global efforts, including by providing the information and the knowledge that is required to find solutions to the problem. And finally, it requested WHO to develop a definition of shortages that could be taken by the countries, also assess the magnitude and the nature of the problem, and then develop a global notification system. So, for definitions, it was very clearly there was an expert consultation and a literature review that found some 56 different definitions of shortage, but the consultation and what resulted in a draft definition, it was very clearly that there is no one definition that fits all, that there is distinctive problems in terms of the supply side, in terms of what is coming into the system and if the availability of product is sufficient to meet the needs, but then there are also the other side from the demand that can be also influenced by supply chain factors of inadequate distribution, procurement practices, funding, etc., that might have a different nature and then also needs a different way to tackle the problems. But also these draft definitions are not set in stone. It differentiates the principles, but what is very important is that they are linked to the particular circumstances of countries or regions, that can be linked also to the practical notification system or legal frameworks that may exist. So they can be adapted in that to serve those purposes. In terms of the magnitude, what is very important is we see that is a widespread problem. There are documented failures that also have show a significant impact on the system, but then also that it affects all countries regardless of the level of development and also the geographical situation. They are widespread and they are complex, as we have seen through this process of coming to today's meeting, and relate to many factors: supply, demand, regulatory, economic, and information. It is very important that they affect also the delivery of health services in many ways, and affects also many actors. And it's not only the patient, but it's also the whole. Affects the capacity of the whole system to serve the needs. It also can have important impacts on global health, and that is that it might hinder the prevention of outbreaks or the reaction to outbreaks. I will go very quickly through how the notification system is being established, but just to say that is very much to have a system that can be used by countries to scale up situations where there are shortages, and that can be able to detect maybe situations where the shortages are upcoming, and there is need to notify countries that might not be aware of the situation, but and also that it would be linked to the falsified and substandard database to see whether there are risks in relation to those two phenomena. Now, there is, when we did a survey this year, we found that 55% of countries were actually having some form of notification system, but many of them did not have a system that is actually based on a regular income of information with well-established parameters, and then also reporting to the public. But also that there is an interest from countries to participate in such a global system, which is encouraging in its development. Now, finally, we need to think about ways to prevent and mitigate these shortages. And on that, we work on four aspects of the problem. One is the market visibility. And for market visibility, there is, for the program, that there is some capacity to do so, especially for the HIV, TB, malaria, and reproductive health. There is an effort to gather global forecast, to gather information that is transmitted also to industry and to funders in terms of what are the changes in the treatment guidelines, what are the projected demand changes, so they are ready, the industry is also ready, and the financing to meet those needs. There is a specific project for vaccines. It's called the Market Information for Access, and that is also trying to enhance the knowledge about the global market by the different players in terms of demand, supply, pricing dynamics, and then also identify affordability and shortage risks. And then it's also a convening platform for partners to discuss the problems faced and the solutions. There is also, we have started conducting market assessments for products that are considered at risk, and for vaccines there are already 3 published. There has been also work on antibiotics, benzathine, benzyl penicillin, that has been affecting many countries, and also disease control efforts around the world. And then also we are planning also to develop work on children cancer and other areas where there is a need. In terms of regulatory system strengthening, there is something called the global benchmarking tool. Is something that is key for countries to step up the capacity of the system to reach adequate levels, both for their own service of the population, but and also to be able to harmonize with other regulatory functions. And then what is very important, to be able to enhance the reliance between the different countries to support each other. And then also there is an area of work on pharmacovigilance, for which all the reporting on substandards and falsified products are also considered important. On procurement and supply chain, there is, you might all well know that the selection is very important, and the work for 40 years, WHO has been supporting the development of essential medicine lists, where the best payback is being prioritized by countries in terms of financing and in terms of securing the access to the population. And these are not exclusive lists of what medicines should be included in the system, but it's really the minimum package of recommended medicines and also diagnostics for which these expert reviews have been conducted. There is also issues related to the procurement, and that is also something that is being promoted with countries in terms of developing strategic, special strategies for financing and pricing and procurement of medicines that adapt to the market circumstances and also the capacity of the buyers. And then also there is the work on supply chain visibility. So there is a lot of effort in relation to enabling better enabling the system to track what is the capacity in terms of the stocks, etc., and the movement of medicines through the system from the supplier to the patient. And one very important aspect, and for which WHO and the regulation has a lot to give to the public, is the access to quality products. And on that, the WHO pre-qualification program has been key in enabling the access to HIV, to tuberculosis and malaria medicines in the world, but is also developing to cover other areas for which there might be a benefit. So whether it's neglected tropical diseases, whether there is the benzathine, benzyl penicillin, some biosimilars, for which work is starting, and in the future we see a way to work further on expanding this list. There is also the collaborative registration procedure that allows countries to establish the necessary procedures to rely on the pre-qualification system, so there can be a very rapid access to medicines into the national systems. And then finally, I would like to mention the issue of local production that is seen by many countries as a way to increase the supply security, and then also achieve some economic and development targets that may exist, and for which is not a panacea, and it requires a lot of effort to establish where parameters are needed and in which circumstances that can be some success. So we see that these areas fit very well in terms of the agenda that the countries are interested into, and just to say that there is also the World Health Assembly requested the WHO to develop a roadmap for access that is linked to the global program of work, and that will be has debated first in the executive board in December, but then in the World Health Assembly and adopted by countries and to give the mandate to WHO. So we look forward also to work with you in getting your support also to reach our goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Any point for clarification? You're running a little bit behind schedule, so Adrian.
Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation. Could there be a reflection in the WHO about encouraging more middle and low-income countries to advance on GMP enforcement and application? Because a lot of these problems of availability are linked to the fact that they don't enforce GMP. I'll give a very concrete example. In Vietnam, they have a kind of quota system for procurement, where about 10% of the procurement goes to branded drugs, if you wish, 30% to GMP compliant or European generic companies, and the other percent is only to local producers. But they don't enforce GMP, so no one knows whether those local producers are compliant with GMP or not. And the result is that physicians don't want to use those drugs. So of course, about halfway through the year, you have a shortage because all the branded and European or international generics have been used. And then there's just the local stuff that the doctors don't want to prescribe. And that's a good example, but that's a very common problem in many lower and middle income countries, that non-enforcement of GMP is creating doubts and problems. And then you have shortages, but in fact, not necessarily compliant GMP product is available.
You want me to? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, WHO. Okay, we have first a function that is to set standards. So WHO standards for GMP are a guidance for the development of whether it's a national or other regulatory setup standards. The enforcement is done through support to the regulatory authorities. And that is what I was mentioning with the global benchmark system, that is establishing some building blocks to which regulatory agencies can measure the capacity, the resources needed to take further functions, also in taking into account the needs. In terms of the decision of individual countries on relying on their own GMP, that is something that is their mandate to do it, to determine the standards. So what can be done is through this voluntary effort to compare yourself with peers, learn where you might have gaps and opportunities to increase. And that is something that there is significant advances in terms of the capacity of the regulatory functions. And is seen for many products when you look at the WHO pre-qualification. The sources of the majority of these products are in middle and income countries. And what we see is that more and more countries are achieving standards that can be correlated to what WHO will see as a minimum.
Thank you very much. I propose that we move on and we go to the next presentation, which is the viewpoint from patient representatives, so François Houillet.
Thank you very much, Noel, and good morning. Okay, thanks. All right. So just to remind us all that at the Patients and Consumers Working Party here at the EMA, we started to work on shortages of medicines, in fact, since 2008, when we had the first shortages with enzyme replacement therapies. And 5 years later, 45 patients and healthcare professionals and consumers organizations adopted a common position on shortages, including series of proposals how we think we could better monitor, prevent, and inform inform on these shortages, and we think that many of these recommendations are still valid. And the same year, the EMA published its reflection paper on shortages. So now we are in 2018, and seen from the public, there seems to be an increasing problem and a disconnect between the efforts towards finding solutions. And as Noel said, there will not be an easy fix to the problem. It will take years. But what the public is saying is an increasing number of shortages, so that the anxiety is not just for patients who are suffering from a shortage, but it's the entire patient community, because now in almost all countries, patients who are on life-saving products can think, what if it happens to me tomorrow? And I think an action plan is welcome and needed, and it must include a better communication plan. Most of the articles we read are very precise in describing the problems in each country, but where they are unclear is about possible solutions, and even more than that, they give the impression that it may be a bit extreme, but that nobody is in charge, because the only solutions that we read are solutions that we know cannot work, cannot be implemented. The main solution which we see in general press proposed by the experts who are interviewed would be to end the globalization of the manufacturing of medicines and to bring back the manufacturing in the EU. We know this will not happen. We know this is not a solution. And I think together with the heads of medicines agencies, the regulatory network should work on the press kit to explain to the general press, to the journalists who are following these issues, what efforts, what solutions are proposed. Even if they don't have an immediate effect, we should certainly increase the communication, the information on what can be done. The concerns for the patients are still the same. They are unchanged since we started to work on this issue. First, in terms of information, often we are only aware there is a problem when we go to the pharmacy to have the product dispensed. And here the only information we get is it's out of stock, and there is no other information on the cause, on how long it can last for, on what can be done. And patients, they don't have a possibility to report. I've been to this pharmacy, to this other one, to that other one. I can't get my medicine. Is there a problem? To whom can I report? Where can I get more information? We need tools like a two-way to create this two-way information, and maybe the WebRadar mobile application can be used for that, not only to report side effects of medicines, but to report other things that happen in the life of patients, like when a shortage occurs, and see which kind of two-way communication we can establish with our national authorities. In terms of consequences, so we've seen examples where, of course, the disease starts again when you stop treatment and when you don't have an alternative. And I'm sure that John Peppard from the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists, who completed a new survey among hospital pharmacists, will explain this later today on the impact in terms of prolonged hospitalization or death that happen to patients in Europe who have to stop treatment. It's extremely difficult to measure the clinical impact of these shortages, and here it's another dilemma. We know they're happening on a large scale. They affect life-saving products with no alternative, but we don't know. We don't see numbers. We don't know how many patients are affected. I mentioned the anxiety, the obligation to have to go from one pharmacy to the next, the risk to make medication errors when you have to substitute with an alternative product, but not exactly the same dose or the same administration mode. And more, patients have to pay extra for the substituted product, which in cases they are more expensive than the one who is in short supply. And one patient told me last week that she needs to pay 150 euros per week from her own pocket, and this is not reimbursed. And we know that not all EU citizens can afford such an extra expense. In terms of management, transparency on causes would be welcome, on available supplies would be welcome, on the duration, on the estimated duration and measures taken would be welcome, participation in decision making when we have to make extremely difficult decisions such as selecting patients who can continue treatment and those who cannot start or cannot continue. The issue of liability, the obligations of distributors, it's extremely complex. It's never the fault, the clear fault and the clear responsibility of one person or one organization. So for those who would like to complain a bit more officially, there is no way they can win because, it will be always the responsibility of a chain and not a single actor. So in terms of impact, and I'm sure that Anna Meruleto from Fabry Network will say a few more words on this, but what we have few data. One we had since 2010 when there was a worldwide shortage of Fabrazyme. The Fabry International Network conducted a very interesting survey among their members. At that time, there were about 3,000 patients treated, and they had responses from 442. And I think that overall what is important to see is that 48% of those who had to change treatment, reduce the dose or switch to an alternative product reported worsening of the disease or adverse drug reaction. And in parallel, the EMA published a report. They looked in eudravigilance data, and they saw an increased reporting of side effects of the same nature than the ones reported by patients. The main difference, and I think that is extremely interesting, is that at that time the EMA eudravigilance considers the serious side effects, hospitalization, death, disability, whereas the patients, of course, report the serious adverse events, but also the severes. And now that eudravigilance is capturing both the serious and the severe adverse event, we think it will give the two pictures the very serious effects, but to have the global picture on the impact for the patients, also the severe impact, the severe effect when there is a shortage. So what do? We look, of course, at the shortages catalogs, and I'm just taking this example as a possible action by patient organizations. So that's a disease where you can suffer from angioedema attacks. And the shortage is due to a higher demand for the product and the production capacities that don't follow the demand. And it affects a large number of countries. There are alternative products, but these alternatives are not necessarily authorized for the same indications, some for attacks, to treat the attacks, but not necessarily to prevent the attacks. And the clinical manifestations are worrying. In the most severe forms, there is a risk of death if left untreated when you suffer from laryngeal edema. So there is a sense of an urgency. There are alternatives. So when we turn to patient organizations, these are the kind of reports they give us. They confirm that substitution can happen, but then there is, again, a tension with the supply of these alternative products. And supply is preferably shipped to higher price countries. And they have problems in countries where a product which is not authorized for prevention cannot be reimbursed, while the alternative product cannot be reimbursed as an off-label use. About the duration and impact, they have no idea on how long it will last for. They see that in some critical moments, some batches can be shipped to countries to try to minimize the problem, but they don't know if there are severe effects from patients. One interesting information is a compassionate use program that has started in one member state in France for a product both for prophylaxis and treatment, precisely for these patients who have no other options, who are suffering, who are at risk of death. So the number of patients who will be enrolled in this compassionate use, in this ATU, will be a direct measurement on the extent of the problem in at least one member state, and then we can multiply by 7 to have an extrapolation to the European size problem. Another report from a patient organization, so it's about shortages of blood-derived products with immunoglobulin replacement therapies, which are used by 70% of patients suffering from primary immune deficiencies. And in one country, we have a report of 1 death in Romania, and this is not to put Romania on the spotlight because that can happen everywhere, where the tender system restricts the number of products, and there is no available alternative in case of shortage. And a new tax was introduced, and the main supplier decided to withdraw the product from the market because with this new tax they thought they would be losing money and not make the few benefits they needed. And there was no alternative. This woman was living remotely in a village, and there was no time to find an equivalent biosimilar, because being a biosimilar at the population level doesn't mean that for one person it's an equivalent product that they can take. And in her case, she was allergic to the only other alternative products. So we know that the impact, it can affect any member state, large or small population. For these products, there is a long manufacturing process, but so when you decide you need to increase production, it will only happen 6 to 12 months later. Plus, the availability of the raw material, the plasma, is a scarce material everywhere. Another aspect is the information of patients, and in this case, patients who are in hospitals or in emergency services. And that's typically a situation where we receive little information when there is a shortage of a medicine that the doctor wanted to prescribe during the hospitalization. We don't have a copy of the prescriptions. We have no information that we have to stay longer at the hospital because they need to find an alternative product. Sometimes, but very rarely, it's mentioned in the discharge. But what do patients really know when a shortage occurs in the hospitals? And to finish, I think, when 2 legs are broken, it's not enough to fix only one to work better. And there are manufacturing issues, there are issues with regulatory aspects, but the economic causes, the second leg, is also important. And here, just an example from a conference in Bratislava in 2016, that was data by the Czech Republic mentioning the extent of re-export to other EU member states, and you see that for some products the proportion of product re-exported in other member states is as high as 80%. So there is a chronic shortage in this country for some products, so that's why they need to put measures that limit the parallel trade. Themselves import product from other neighboring countries, which then have another problem, another shortage in these countries. And there is a cascade of parallel trade and shortages due to this permanent re-export, due to the price differences within member states. And that's certainly a cause that needs to be addressed. To finish with some outstanding issues about the shortage management, we still think there should be a European body to decide when there is a shortage, how to distribute the product in a fair manner, ensuring equity among member states and also within member states. It's not satisfying to see one member state saying, well, we'll pay more than others, so we will get a higher supply than others. We need a European solution to fix that. Knowing that in extreme situations, some ethics committees have recommended a random process, stating that only a randomization is ethical to allocate a very small supply. The issue on how to inform patients which pharmacy may have the product he or she is looking for. Can we avoid having to go back to the doctor to have a new prescription when the pharmacist cannot substitute automatically without a prescription by the doctor? The public health impact and the indicators and tools that we need to measure the effect. And a question for the role for military pharmacies, particularly for antimicrobial products. some are proposing to produce products when there is a supply. They have an obligation anyway to be able to supply it for the soldiers, and they are proposing to supply it for the most vulnerable citizens in some cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, François. I think these real-life examples have shown once again how extremely complex the issue is. As we are running out of time, I would propose to immediately go to the next presentation, and then we will certainly come back and further discuss. Yeah, okay. So we go now to the European Society for Medical Oncology. So Elisabeth de Vries, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I'm a medical oncologist in Groningen, the Netherlands, and I'm representing ESMO, and ESMO is very happy that we get this opportunity to talk here on availability of cancer medicines. The reason is that the members know the problem very well, and at the moment we have around 20,000 members. When we talk about this issue, it's probably important first to talk about what are important cancer medicines. At the moment, we have a scale developed within ESMO, and with this scale, we grade drugs, and we grade drugs that are newly registered by EMA. We do so since 2016. And other, of course, important drugs are drugs on the essential medicine list of the WHO. If you go to the scale, on that scale, what you see on the left side, we take into account survival, response rate, prognosis of the condition, but also quality of life and toxicity. And in order to have a substantial improvement with a new drug, you require an A or a B in the curative setting and a 5 or 4 in the non-curative setting. Here, the WHO Essential Medicine List for solid tumors. What we did is we graded 2 of the more fresher drugs, imatinib and trastuzumab, and they got a firm A. And you may appreciate that many of the drugs, the older drugs on this list, are A drugs. They're used often in curative settings. So because of the problems experienced by members, ESMO did a survey, and that was published in 2016 in the Annals of Oncology. And here you see the results, and I only use the example for prostate cancer, the results across the European countries. When the picture is blue, it's no problem. When the color code goes down, there are more and more out-of-pocket costs, and when it's black, the drug is not available. But from this survey, we also learned that it was not only expensive medicine, but also often generic, inexpensive medicines that were not available. So now I show you the data for the WHO Essential Medicine List across Europe. Blue, always available, but when the color code goes down, there is less availability, and in case when it's black, it's not available at all. This was the situation at the moment the survey was performed. So I have 2 slides on all these drugs. These were our results. Now, at the last ESMO meeting in October this year, Werman presented for the German Society for Hematology and Medical Oncology their data. So here you see the x-axis and the drugs that were missing. They divide the shortages due to production quality issues, due to an increased demand, pricing, or market withdrawal. You see that there is a large blue cloud, for example. They, in 2016, did a jour fixe. All the parties involved got together. They now do management of shortages by early information, facilitated import, and recommendation on alternatives. But they also indicate that they have no long-term solutions for the quality of production dependency on Asia and the US, and adequate pricing. Given all the issues experienced by members, ASMO started discussions with the Economist Intelligence Unit, and a report was written. The report is available on the web, and Malvika Vias is head of public policy, she's over there, of ASMO, and she brought hard copies for those who would like to have them. This report was presented last year at the European Parliament. So it contains 6 recommendations on how to tackle medicine shortage. First, introduce legislation for early notification on requirements for medicine shortages. Establish strategic plans, develop catalogs of shortages, develop essential medicines list, and assess the risk for shortages, and induce incentives for production infrastructure improvements, and establish procurement models designed to prevent medicine shortages. In a little bit more detail, first the legislation. National legislation for early notification from manufacturers should be implemented in all European countries, and that is stipulated in the directive as well. The legislation should include also the requirement for manufacturers to provide information on reasons for discontinuation. Then, strategic plans for medicine shortage. There should be national strategic plans, and this initiative could be proposed at the European level, with countries having an option to implement it on a national level. Then, catalogs of shortages. Each country should have a national system for reporting medicine shortages. European regulatory authorities could coordinate the development of harmonized procedures, also use a shared definition for shortage, and they could also develop a platform, a database, to combine the reports from the national systems, and that preferably should be available, the data, to everybody. Then, an essential medicine list. Countries should develop a national essential medicine list. There, the WHO list could be used. And then the EMA risk indicators for shortages should be used to identify high-risk products. Then, incentives for production infrastructure improvements. Health system and payers in European countries should consider financial incentives for production infrastructure improvements, and incentives for suppliers to enter and remain in a national market could also be considered. Then, procurement models. Good procurement models that address predictability and profitability for medicine manufacturers should be identified. Then the cycle harmonization could be considered within and across countries, and national procurements for medicine experiencing shortages could be considered. So EMA did this survey in 2015 and found that mandatory notification for shortages is required by law in most EU member states. However, 7 countries had not introduced this requirement into national legislation, but a lack of a common definition makes it also very difficult to compare the different situations. Now, what is ASMO doing? It's continuing its effort to find an EU-wide solution. We are currently working with the Economist Intelligence Units towards creating country profiles in 5 selected European countries from Eastern and Western Europe. We continue dialogue with policymakers to keep the issue high on the political agenda, and hope to translate our recommendations into action. And we are very happy with this meeting here, because we really hope that that the EU will go for a common regulatory approach to tackle also inexpensive essential medicine shortages. After all, an issue that should not exist in the EU. I would like to thank you, and more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any point for clarification? Adrian?
Thank you. I'm from the generic biosimilar and value-added medicines industry, and I think your point is very spot on. I think this requires, however, a very clear coordination between two sections in the European Commission to enable this in practice, in law, in particular the relationship between the sort of shortage prevention plans and the procurement rules that you mentioned. Currently, under EU procurement law, in most implementations in most EU member states, what you're proposing would be illegal, in the sense that if a company would be required to do this and another company was not able, it could challenge that procurement and it would probably win, according with the jurisprudence of most procurement law cases at national level. But this could be solved very easily with a coordination between the Internal Market Directorate, who was planning, but unfortunately is delayed, to issue new guidance on EU procurement law, and DG Santé. There could be an alignment here, and I'm sure that our industry would also be very keen to develop a policy around that. But we need that recognition in EU procurement law that you can do that. There have been many cases in many countries with shortage prevention attempts around procurement law that have been challenged and they were rendered illegal, and therefore it's not possible. So I think this would really be a great exercise. I can put you in touch with the head of unit in DG Internal Market who's keen to do this. For some reason there's a delay. It has nothing to do with the willingness. It's some kind of bigger policy delay that they can't do new things. But eventually under the next commission, this could be something we could all work on together.
Okay, I propose we also take that point up later on. I'm sure the Commission would also like to say something about this. Okay, we'll start the discussion at 10 o'clock. So can we move on now to Christine Rautseb, who will elaborate on how regulators are working to improve prevention and management of availability problems. Christine?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to tell you how the regulators, the drug regulatory authorities, work now in coping with the problem. So availability problems out there, you have heard about it. I'm not touching it very much, but you know, it looks like an iceberg. Sometimes it is coming unexpectedly. And very often you don't understand on the first glance how big is the part under the water. So it makes it quite difficult to solve on the level of the drug regulatory authority, but of course we try it every day. Saying something about Estonia, I can tell you that 60% of the medicines which are authorized are not actually coming to the market. And among those which are on the market, we have quite a lot of shortages every year, and they last quite long. So we have to deal with the problem daily, and very often we work like a real logistical center to try to exchange information and try to solve the problem at the same time. And we have seen all kinds of problems with medicines. It may happen with a very simple everyday medicine, but it is much worse in the cases which were already told by previous speakers. But yes, we have seen the vaccines in the shortage list, the cancer treatment products, life-saving hospital medicines. And the patients suffer, of course. And the pharmacists and the doctors are quite angry. So we have passed through this who is responsible period. So of course there are lots of stakeholders in this chain, and sometimes we don't know who exactly triggered this case. I think we have some help of the paper the Commission issued about the responsibilities of shortages, and let's try to keep it, but you know, as we have said, it is not very productive to punish the one who who triggered the shortage. For example, the punishment could be cancelling the marketing authorization, which of course everybody understands will make the shortage real and long-lasting. So it is a difficult thing, and mostly we try to cooperate, exchange information, talk to them, try to make solutions. So about systematic management of the problem in the network, already for several years the HMA-EMA strategy to 2020 includes availability problem as one of the most important ones. And based on this strategy, both EMA and heads of medicines agencies have put several availability tasks into their working plans. And based on these things, most important, or maybe one of the most important ones, is creating the task force specially dedicated to availability of authorized products. Additionally, we can say that all the presidency countries have, during last years, have taken the availability as one of the most important things. It was in 2017 by Estonian agency, and this year by Bulgaria and Austria. Availability is being the priority of the presidency member states. At the task force, EMA is represented, HMA is represented, European Commission, interested national competent authorities, chairs of the coordination groups, both human and veterinary, inspectors working group of communication professionals, and European surveillance strategy working group representatives are present. So it is really quite a broad discussion platform, and we hope very much that the information will not stay there. It is like a coordination group, and sometimes the tasks will be distributed to other working groups. Just to tell you that, again, stress that this task force includes work for both for human and veterinary medicinal products, and today we are discussing mainly human medicinal products issues, but the veterinary part will be touched in the availability session. So as to the mandate, I can tell you that we are dealing with two types of products. We know there are other possible availability problems, but we are dealing with two of them. If the product is authorized but not marketed or no longer marketed, and the second one being that medicinal product is authorized and marketed, but the supply chain disruption directly prevent the availability due to several problems: GMP, GCP, any other quality problem, safety concern, parallel trade, or whatever might happen suddenly or not so suddenly. There is a steering committee giving a strategic direction to the task force, quickly I will go through. We are having three thematic working groups in the task force. First of them dealing with marketing authorization issues. The second one dealing directly with supply disruption, mostly said shortages. And the third one is a communication one, and as you heard from previous speaker, it is a very important thing how to make better communication if we will not be able to avoid the shortage. So the work has started in 2017. We have done a lot of planning issues. Now we are working according to the plan. And we have already adopted the working plan in 2017, but we updated it in 2018 due to the Brexit and possible availability problems in connection to Brexit. Each of these themes I mentioned are having actions in the working plan. And the public version of the working plan has been published both on HMA and EMA websites, so if you are interested, or probably you have already seen it, you may do it anytime. Some more words about regulators have done. Both HMA and EMA are having special section about availability, so you may find there lots of information you might need. There is also published a dedicated analysis on availability problems in the network. HMA is very much concerned about how to facilitate the reporting and information exchange. On our website, we have put the special place where you can find links to the national websites, to the national contact points dealing with shortages. So it is not, of course, a fancy portal covering all the issues, but it is at least something for the beginning, so you may find easily the way to look through all the member states and the shortage catalogs. And of course, on the HMA meetings, I think availability has been on the agenda almost every time, and again, you have the possibility to look the public stakeholder information after each HMA meeting on the website. Again, a special place on the HMA website is about compassionate use. We hope that you will find this information now more easily found. Some words about multilingual packages. The regulators are very much trying to facilitate the use of multilingual packages as one option how to make the medicinal products more easily coming to the market and not so easily going into shortages. For example, we can say that in Estonia we have a quite good experience on Baltic packages, but all other combinations are also possible. So yesterday we talked to the industry, so we really try to, if there is a possibility that it will help to solve availability problems, the regulators take it very seriously and try to encourage using it. But I can again say you that even if we are having a very nice Baltic package of the medicine, the reality was that actually the vaccine went into shortage very, very quickly, and we had to use all the flexibility European legislation allows us to allow to the market medicinal products in whatever languages there have been in Bulgarian, in Slovenian, in French, so they are all on the Estonian market. What to do? Some words maybe about electronic patient information leaflet. It is something the regulators are discussing together. At the moment, all the electronic information may be used in parallel. At the moment, it is not possible to replace any paper in the package, but let's see how the future will be about it. Lots of work and discussions are going on. So the common database, something is under discussion, but we don't have a very clear situation at the moment how it will look like. We know that product management system under SPOR project is going on, and it is under development, but there should be the place where marketing authorization holders will have the opportunity to add the section risk of supply shortages. Let's see when it will be ready, so we will know then better. And of course, we know that the EU Medicines web portal at the moment is on hold due to Brexit at the moment. So no promises at the moment. And some other things, discussions which are going on. It is from the political level. For example, Austrian presidency has proposed that maybe a public list of centrally authorized products should be published together with the indication in which member states they are marketed. And there were also some discussions, can we use sunset clause and its possibilities further on to help the situation. So, of course, Brexit you will hear a lot. We know Horizon has changed and lots of resource planning has been done in the network, but the availability problems will be there. We are afraid and quite sure about it. And in February, there will be the last implementation date of the Falsified Medicines Directive in connection to the safety features. It might be that there will be also some availability problems. So I will not stop on Brexit issues. There will be a special section. And as I told you about safety features, there are concerns that it might harm, again, the availability of medicines in some member states, maybe in connection to the cost of the system or to some unexpected IT problem, or in connection to the disharmony between stakeholders. So, conclusion, how regulators are working, I can tell you and assure you that we are working systematically, we are working hard. Every day, of course, each member state is doing something which concerns only this member state, but we are doing it also together like a network. And I think, again, I would like to stress again that cooperation with industry is very important to prevent and mitigate the shortages, so I'm happy we are all together here today. Thank you very much for your information, for your interest, and I would like to thank also all the members of the task force who have worked hard to be ready with the deliverables we are showing to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I propose we finish now with the industry viewpoint, and then we will have ample time for discussion. So, Adriaan, you will present the no, you can. Yeah. So, 1 second. So this will be the combined industry presentation, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so slightly shorter version compared to yesterday. So good morning, everybody. I'm Adriaan Venro, and I'm the Director General of Medicines for Europe, Generic, Biosimilar, and Value-Added Manufacturing sector. But we also have a joint industry presentation. We had a much longer one yesterday as we were going into a lot of technical discussions. So I've shortened it a little bit with really a kind of core focus on 2 issues. One, shortages, and the second one, availability across different European member states. And of course, I thank all the colleagues from the different sectors for their contributions, and apologize if some of the slides that they had contributed to from yesterday have been deleted, but we wanted to be a little bit focused today. So first point is to talk a little bit about medicines shortages, which I think is a big concern, which was expressed by many of the patient representatives and regulators in the previous presentations. So trying to understand a little bit the causes and main drivers, scenarios, how we can better as an industry communicate about shortages, and then to talk again about that availability across different European countries, a slightly different issue, but equally important. So from an industry perspective, there are many different causes and drivers around shortages, and in fact, there are different scenarios. So there are issues related to products that are not yet authorized, so there can be regulatory delays to the approval for a variety of different reasons, either from the regulatory side or from the manufacturer developer side, if you wish. And that, of course, can lead to a delay. There are products that then can subsequently be authorized but not yet launched, and that leads to a delay. That can be either from a manufacturing side, that there can be a delay in, for instance, scaling up the production. but there could also be certain natural disasters or fires or various things like this that can affect production capacities or specific national requirements. But there's also, of course, the aspect of market attractiveness, size of the company, ability to expand across different markets. That's more an economic related issues. Then I guess when we're talking really about shortage, we're talking about products that are authorized and already marketed, but unavailable due to shortages. And here, a lot of these issues are related to manufacturing issues, so manufacturing lag. What that means is there are surges in demand, and the ability to upscale the manufacturing to cover that demand is slower than the demand itself. There can also be GMP issues. GMP essentially is quality issues where you need to cease the production to ensure the appropriate specifications, which are essential for human health and the use of those medicines. There also can be issues in the supply chain. So for the production of the chemicals that go into the products, which are either the pharmaceutical ingredient itself or the excipients there, and those can be in short supply and can affect the access. There are also a lot of economic issues, which I'll go into in some detail. It was already raised a little bit, tender practices, other procurement practices, if you wish. And then there are issues that can affect really more the supply chain. So once the market is into the supply chain, if you wish, the wholesaler or the hospital supply chain, the retail supply chain, and this can lead to also problems around certain shortages. Then there are more permanent shortages where there's a major manufacturing capacity issue or a decision of commercial withdrawal of the product. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pricing policies. So I think we can say realistically across Europe, there are very efficient mechanisms to contain the cost of pharmaceuticals. This leads to a number of different policy mechanisms to control the price of pharmaceuticals. And this has an impact on the forecasting of companies as to how many volumes they're going to produce because they need to match that with the price they can achieve. I think what's probably poorly understood more in the wider community is that the regulatory system, and this is a good thing, is moving towards stricter forms of regulation in a variety of different ways. For example, we have a stricter supply control over the supply chain today for a number of very valid and good reasons. We have increasing control over manufacturing, basically to prevent counterfeiting with, for instance, the Falsified Medicines Directive, which is a huge, huge project for the industry plus the supply chain. We have a number of regulatory procedures which are changing. We are moving from a paper-based regulatory system to an IT-based regulatory system that has a huge investment from the side of the industry. And then we have a number of distribution-related aspects or supply chain-related aspects. For instance, there's quite a consolidation of the chemical industry side of the business, leading to, for instance, increase the cost of pharmaceutical ingredients, thereby affecting the price. And you see what we have here is a pricing framework or a market framework which is based on cost containment, on lowering the cost of drugs. But we have a manufacturer's perspective which is based on higher costs. And so this is creating some challenges. One of the things that was mentioned was tender practices. So tenders are basically applied in almost every member state in the hospital segment, either at a regional or a hospital level. But it's also in certain markets, it's also applied in the retail segment with so-called preference policies. And almost all of the time, and I mentioned it, it's actually to a certain extent a requirement of EU law. These tenders are based solely on price. So that is the real determining factor as to who will win the tender. And even attempts to have security of supply built in there have been rejected in a variety of circumstances by national courts as a breach of procurement law. So this is very, very difficult issue. But there are more than just this single price issue. There are a lot of very technical issues. For example, most tender systems in Europe have very short lead times. That means you win the tender and you have a very short time to scale up to supply for that tender. This is something relatively easy to fix. It has no cost for anybody. It's just a planning exercise, and it's incredible that we're not able to solve these problems across Europe. I think another thing you have, and people are often unaware of this more on the regulatory side, is you have very severe penalties in the tender system. So, for example, often for the generic industry, for generic companies, you have to compensate to the price of the reference product, of the branded product, if you have a shortage. And that can be 10 times the price in the hospital segment. So that is more than the economic value, not the profits, the economic value of the total tender itself. So this is making tenders a rather high-risk proposition for a number of manufacturers. But it's not just tenders. You have a lot of systems, as they were mentioned to a certain extent. You have increasingly payback systems, which were designed with a good intent if it's product-by-product payback. But increasingly what we see is industry-wide payback systems, which leads to unpredictable taxes, essentially, on the industry. Romania is probably the most extreme example of this, which has led to 2,000 products being withdrawn. But we have a similar scenario in the hospital segment, for example, in Portugal. And this leads to a very severe impact on certain manufacturers. Price cuts are a regular phenomenon. Often we have overspending of the pharmaceutical budget, which is fixed or with a capped growth. And then you have a price cut to try and compensate for this. It's usually unpredictable. It's an overnight announcement of the price cut. We have had severe payment delays. This was a particularly big problem during the financial crisis. And so the general underfunding, and it leads to fewer manufacturers essentially in the market. Then there are other factors. So commercial withdrawals, I think what happens over time is these different price factors, they play into one another, and then manufacturers then may decide to withdraw. And we've seen this particularly in the hospital segment, with the number of manufacturers supplying markets across Europe divided by 2. But also in certain categories or classes of products like anti-infectives, we've seen the number of suppliers, of effective large volume suppliers, diminishing, essentially because of a combination of different factors. To give an example, you can have a tender policy, you can win a tender, and that's based on a discount to your list price. But then if you have something called internal or external reference pricing, your list price can go down by law if somebody else has a lower price than you in the market, which means your tender price automatically goes down in that circumstance as well. So it's a kind of tricky situation for manufacturers. And this is why these commercial withdrawals are occurring on a wider scale probably today than they were a few years ago. I want to give an example. This is from our vaccine colleagues. I think this is rather a good example of the challenges that you have today. So vaccine manufacturing is huge capacity manufacturing, gigantic capacity, because obviously the huge needs for vaccines. But these are also very complex, especially modern vaccines. These are biotech vaccines. So they have huge capacity, huge technology and complexity. And so therefore, the manufacturing for vaccines starts many years in advance to supply the market. So you see there's a long lead time between the commencement of the manufacturing and the actual supply to the market. And so this leads to a lot of potential bottlenecks if you have surprising changes in demand. For example, there has been demand due to the outbreak of certain diseases like measles, et cetera, that were not predicted. And suddenly there was a huge demand, and then that capacity is not elastic, if you wish, enough to be able to quickly react to that. And you can say, well, we should just build a new factory. Well, this is a huge capital allotment. It's something that takes many years to build, to get regulatory approvals, et cetera. Now, this is very, in a way, kind of maybe the most extreme example in the pharmaceutical industry, but it's a reflection of the way it is in, I think, all other manufacturing aspects of the pharmaceutical industry, depending on its complexity, depending on the volumes, et cetera. Now, I think the vaccine manufacturers, they just want to point out that, of course, they are trying really hard to address this issue, just as the rest of the industry is doing the same, to try and increase capacity to the extent that it is possible with the establishment of new facilities or expanding existing facilities. But as I mentioned, it's not just the willingness, it's not just digging in the ground and putting up new buildings. All of this needs to be certified, inspected, approved, et cetera. So it's a long process before you can actually achieve such a manufacturing point. As they want to point out, there have been recent very big changes in immunization programs, both at EU and national level and global level, because of unpredictable changes that have occurred. And so therefore there's a big demand. Europe is, of course, one of the biggest manufacturers of vaccines, and so therefore it's affected also by global demand, not just European demand. So Vaccines Europe has some recommendations which I think the whole of the manufacturing industry can agree to. It's important to establish early dialogue between manufacturers and health authorities to anticipate evolutions of vaccine recommendations or demand. The same would be true for other types of production. Introduce good procurement practices to enable the better management of risk. Most vaccine purchase is done through tenders, procurement systems. And so as a result, they have many of the same challenges that I was describing in the other procurement systems of an unpredictable, whether you win or lose kind of situation, obviously big impact on demand. And then you have to optimize this capacity by streamlining some of the regulatory requirements, for instance, with global harmonization, which is something the whole industry also would like to apply across different productions. And there are definitely opportunities to work together, both for vaccines but other manufacturing types to do this. And I think the dialogue we had yesterday with the regulators was a very constructive one with respect to notification. Let's talk a little bit about communication. So it is important, and it is a legal requirement for manufacturers to notify national competent authorities, that's what NCA stands for, with respect to shortages. And this is an obligation under the law. There's normally a 2-month deadline, although, of course, there can be circumstances where something is unpredictable, and this is shorter. But this is something that needs to be done under law, and it is done, and so that's positive. I think what we agree both among the authorities and the industry is that we need to increase the convergence and the harmonization across Europe about how this reporting is done, and that was really our discussion yesterday. So a lot of work to be done there, but a good first step in the process of addressing this issue. And we're in discussions, maybe a unique portal or taking advantage of some of the IT systems that already exist could be a way of building this up, but we need to still discuss some of the technical details of how to do that. This is just something, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, it's just a little bit how the industry sees a kind of risk-based approach to this to kind of scale up the concerns over shortages. So the most efficient way in this circumstance is to have the immediate and rapid dialogue between manufacturers and authorities over a shortage or a potential shortage, and to engage rapidly in the maximum sharing of available information so that then the authorities can communicate to the supply chain, like the wholesalers or the pharmacies, etc., but also to the patients, to inform the patients, because if there's a real shortage where you need to switch to a different therapy, for example, there needs to be an efficient communication to the patients as well. So this is something that is very, very important. As we said, it's working, but we can optimize this. We can do a better job, certainly, and that's what we're going to be doing over the next little while, trying to agree to that. I think one of the things from the manufacturer's perspective, we're looking at shortages as different types of risks of shortages. Now, really, there are, you see in the red there, those are the very high-level risks that we can see. So, for example, if you have a life-saving drug that is unavailable and there are no alternatives, this is obviously a very big risk, and we need to work together to address that very, very quickly. On the other hand, there may be more chronic diseases where there may be not the same drug available, but an alternative therapy and, say, a class of products that may be available, and that is more like a yellow level of risk. And then there are more the green level of risks where, for example, you might have a chronic disease, but you have the same drug with a different brand, like one generic brand to a different brand. Now, obviously, none of this is perfect. Even the green, we would prefer not to have any of these situations. But in those situations, we need to look at it this way so that we ensure the patients get the therapy they need. This is an agreement across the whole industry, the supply chain, that we want to ensure patients get the medicines that they need. This is very, very important. And it's a philosophy we share across the whole industry and supply chain. So conclusions on medicine shortages is that medicine shortages are a multifactorial issue. There are a lot of complex legal and regulatory and market dynamics there that need to be addressed. We're doing a first step with this notification, but those other steps I mentioned to the ESMO colleagues, we need to do something around EU procurement law. We can do something. Just because it's complex doesn't mean we cannot solve these things. We need to work together. The other colleagues were saying about manufacturing. Yes, we need to work on more resilience of the manufacturing, including in Europe. We are reaching out to, for instance, the chemical industry to try and work more closely with them so that they can have more robust, but also more information so that they can react. There are some small chemical manufacturers who might be able to help in some of these circumstances. There are a lot of complexities, so there are single source versus multi-source complexities. So by that we basically mean on-patent versus generic products. I mean, to simplify. You have a lot of specific complexities around vaccines and sterile products. These are often injectable products. These are very high risk from a manufacturing perspective. Even older sterile products are very high risk from a manufacturing perspective, at risk, if you wish, of production issues. And so therefore you have to tightly control this, and sometimes this leads to bottlenecks. So we need to work together. It's complex, but this is a very serious issue. As those numbers are pointing out, we need to work together. Now I want to talk a little bit more about availability. So this really comes from our colleagues from FPA, because a lot of this is about the availability of new drugs that have been approved in Europe, but maybe launched at different times in different markets. And there are different factors. So here we're talking about drugs that have been approved from a regulatory point of view, but are launched at different times in different national markets. So part of the problems that occur is to do sometimes with the healthcare system and the expertise. As you know, for many new drugs, there's a highly complex infrastructure. For instance, if you're thinking of new oncology drugs that may need to be put into place to actually use some of those products, some education towards the physicians, et cetera, et cetera. So some of this can be a challenge as well. A second key factor is that pricing and reimbursement processes in Europe have different timeframes. We'll see a little bit more about that. But also there are spillover effects. We have different national pricing and reimbursement systems, but we have trade between European countries. And we also have something called external price referencing, which is the comparison of prices between different markets. And normally the aim is to lower the price on your market compared to a lower price outside. And this affects, let's say, how companies will launch products. There also sometimes can be specific regulatory requirements, not so much for centralized products, but certainly for decentralized products. There are different national requirements there. Then there's an issue of size of population. It came up yesterday, but this is also in relation to the GDP per capita investment in healthcare in the country. Availability of IP rights, and then this was probably something more to do with accession. Probably this is less of an issue today, but maybe François can clarify. And then there's cost to bring the product to market. So I think a lot of people may understand you have a regulatory cost to set up in each market, but you may also have specific regulatory requirements, whether it's additional pharmacovigilance, additional monitoring, what have you. And that is, it requires a local infrastructure that you must develop and invest in. Now, FPA did a study called the WAIT study, and I believe it is available on the FPA website, so you can download it and look at all the details. Just to be clear, this is not the same definition as what is called the Transparency Directive, which is a legal requirement for the pricing and reimbursement delays. So as you can see on this graph, there's a huge variation across European countries in terms of the availability. What this means is these products are approved from a regulatory point of view in all European countries, but they are only available in the markets at a very different time. And you can see that in Germany, you have roughly 85%, almost all products available in the market. The UK, pretty close. Essentially quite wealthy West European countries with a lot of different products available, a lot of options. The further you go in terms of the GDP per capita investment side, you see a diminution of that. That's not that surprising if you look at the economics behind this situation. Now here, I think what you can see is there's also a delay between the effective marketing authorization processes for administrative processes. Like this is certain post-marketing processes that may be required. And again, you see a similar set of countries which are very, very efficient in this regard. Some countries in the middle, and some countries at the back of the list. And obviously, I think more could be done to accelerate these processes, but it's complex. It needs to be done country by country. There are a number of legal and other challenges associated with that, as well as economic. We need to be honest about this. Now here we're talking also about the number of days. And here, when you look at the number of days, this is huge. As you can see, between the lowest country, which is 100 days in Germany, you go up to, well, Serbia is not an EU member state, but maybe 1 day. It's 3 years. But even Portugal, it's 2 years. So that's a significant difference, obviously material for patients who may need those medicines. Yeah, so that's that. My colleague Francois will be ready to answer any questions on the availability point, and I'll try and respond on the shortages point.
Now? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I would like to add a few elements in order for you to understand clearly the scope of those figures. So what we do every year, we go to the EMEA website, we take the list of marketing authorization. So we select those molecules which have been placed on the European market for the first time. So we do not take, for example, new indication. So the data which are shown today are based on those marketing authorization which have been granted from the 1st January 2014 to the 31 December 2016. Then we take as date of observation the 1st December 2017, and we are looking together with our member associations and now with the support of IQVIA whether at 1st December those medicines are available on the market. When we speak about availability, we take the date of granting of the reimbursement decision. And sometimes it's not possible for some countries, so we take a proxy which, in order just to have the same understanding. What I wanted absolutely to stress is that we have done this exercise for about 10 years, but what you see over the years, and we have not put a comparative table, but the situation is not improving. The situation is deteriorating, and we need to clearly understand the drivers behind this. So what you see is that you have an increase of the market access delays for new products, but also you see that less and less markets are served, or that the products are available on less and less markets. And when you take, for example, the recent developments in the US, with the US wanted to compare their prices, even net prices with the US prices, this is going also to have an impact on how some global companies will approach the various markets. And if you are close, or if you read a little bit, you will see already a number of calls for Europe to increase their prices, just because it's not normal that, for example, for new innovative products, when you take global sale of new products over the last 5 years, you have a market of 300 million inhabitants paying for roughly 70% of the global sales in the world. So this is something that we need to reflect upon at one stage. So what we are doing right now, on Monday, we will finalize the list for launching the new inquiry. So what we are doing this year is not only to go with the year starting 1st January 2015 to 31st December 2017, and then to check whether the products are available on 1st December 2018 on the various markets. But we are also extending this to cover the 4-year period. So also to take again the products which were approved in 2014 in order to see whether there are differences between the information that we have published earlier this year, and then we will publish earlier next year. So we have a list, for example, of 205 products. So roughly for this study, it was 46 products in 2014, 53 in 2015, 47 in 2016. So there has been, for example, 9 withdrawal of marketing authorization for the period. So we will remove those products, but we will then make a clear comparison. And if you are interested, just because we are there are 3 or 4 countries which are not covered. We are now working with ICVIA in order just to get additional information. The issue is not to blame. We do not want to blame for not making the products available on the market. We do not want to blame competent authorities for not accepting the pricing or reimbursement conditions. Or the issue is really to understand the drivers. And if some of you are interested to join the working session when we will compile all this information, which is at the end of January, you are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for this additional piece of information. It's certainly interesting data that are being presented. We have 23 minutes for discussion. I would like, because there may be some comments following the presentations that have been made, but could we please put those into a particular context? As has already been elaborated by various speakers, we are dealing here with a very complex and multifactorial problem. I would like to make sure that we are as comprehensive as possible in terms of all the different factors which are linked to availability of products, being these authorized or not authorized. If we can deal with them within this setting, that's a different matter. And the answer to that question will be, for some, we won't. But anyway, it doesn't hurt in order to make sure that we have an as complete overview as possible about all the different factors which are influencing availability of medicines. This will then help us in order to identify those that we can address and those that we have to pass on to other fora, because we will not be able to. If we talk about pricing, reimbursement, in this setting, we cannot address. But it is important that we have at least the overall picture and that we can start building from that. And we know that there have been attempts before, but I think it's good that perhaps we try to be as comprehensive as possible. So in your comments that you're going to make, can you bear that in mind? If you see any particular element, factor that has not been raised today, to indicate this, and then we can take that, we can add that to the overall picture. So I know that the European Commission wanted to react to some of the statements made, so I will first give the floor to Agnès.
Yes, thank you. I wanted just to react on the remark made earlier on the political dimension and why member states do not order enough product. It's true, you have quite a valid point. We cannot exclude that shortages are linked to economic reason. We know that this broader problem of access is also related to pricing and reimbursement decisions taken in the individual member states. The Commission has not necessarily the competence over these matters, but still the Commission is willing to provide information and to provide support for the member states to take the right decision. And it is why I explained we try to have a study on the incentive to see the impact on access. We try to have a cooperation on HTA to help that the member state can take an informed decision. I think also that here in the HMA task force, we are mainly medicine agency or people dealing with the pharmaceutical legislation. So we have to see, as Noel said, what is in the remit of our responsibility. And the purpose is to have some concrete action where we can make a difference. We spoke about the multilingual packaging, electronic leaflet, flexibility for the package leaflet, the system of notification, the use of IT system. I heard a lot of good and concrete actions that could mitigate certain problems of shortage of medicine. Let's try to focus our discussion on those concrete things where you have the right people here in the room.
Thank you. So who would like to take the floor? Yes, and could you please each time state your name and your affiliation?
Raymond Anderson from PGU and a practicing pharmacist. We heard twice, we've heard the role of shortages being involved. There's a pharmacovigilance element in shortages. We've heard about the risks in terms of red list drugs and the effect on patients. In terms of the pharmacovigilance, I wonder in terms of risk management plans in medicines which are being pre-assessed or marketed, in their risk management plans is the possibility of shortages of that drug or that product and the consequences of that. Could they be incorporated in a risk management plan? I know they're not at the moment, but because of the consequences of patients being started on medicines and then those not becoming available, that brings a risk in terms of pharmacovigilance.
Thank you. We will gather first all the comments and then we will reply or try to reply. Any other comments? Birte.
Beert van Elk from the Medicine Evaluation Board in the Netherlands. It was touched upon if we have about which falls within the setting here. It was touched upon very briefly, but we also have the sunset clause. And maybe that's not the main driver up front or when you look at innovative new medicines, but it's after 3 years not being valid on them or not being introduced on the market or not anymore, after 3 years the marketing authorization is ceased. This is something we really would like to have a closer look because it causes something. It's very difficult for the national competent authorities to live up a sunset clause while at the same time you're struggling with shortages. So this would be something we would like to see addressed not only by the task force, because I'm a member of the task force myself, but I'm looking to Agnes and to the European Commission. This would be very helpful if we have a frame for this, or if we could discuss this openly, why the sunset clause is not always the best option to improve or to make sure that there are less shortages. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Yes, so first the first lady here. Yes, please.
Charlotte Roffian, I'm representing here IFA, but also a French platform of patient and healthcare user organization called France Asso Santé. And I wanted to follow up on François' presentation, actually, and especially on the point of patient information on shortages. And we completely agree on the fact that this information is completely lacking. And most of the time, patients learn about shortages when they go to their pharmacy. They have no other information about the reasons why, how long will that last, where can I find the medicine, which are the alternatives, etc. And this causes a real problem of patient safety. So since France is supposed to have a rather good system of reporting of shortages, we believe that an evaluation of the systems in place would be very useful, because the perception sometimes of how the system is delivering is different from how it looks like on paper. And we wanted to support a proposal that François made, which is report by patient of shortages and the shortages they experience themselves, and report not only of the shortage they experience, but also what do they do when they experience a shortage, because we know that there is a lot of kind of system D approach, which are extremely dangerous. And so in order to measure which are the consequences in terms of really of public health. And why not, François was mentioning an app or a website, why not directly in pharmacies themselves? So we could think about a kind of a device in the pharmacy, which is a place where patients experience a shortage, where they could directly report the shortage experience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next, please. Yes.
Yes, so Michel Stoffel, representing Vaccines Europe. One of the ways to mitigate shortages is to reallocate doses between countries. So on a regular basis, when we have shortages, what we are doing is that we are discussing with national authorities about the transfer of doses which were produced for another country. There are very different reactions from national authorities. Some authorities are very flexible about using the packs in other languages. Some are much less flexible, and what we see also, we can have different approaches. For instance, flexibility can be accepted when the doses are used in tenders, but not when they are distributed via pharmacies. As a consequence, we have often to repack doses, which is certainly a problem from a GMP perspective, but which is also a time and resource consuming exercise. The additional concerns that we have now is with the introduction of the FMD beginning of next year. Why? Because the process will be even further complex. What we will have to do is to decommission the doses, repack the doses, reserialize the doses, and recommission them. So it's something which is becoming even much more complex than what it is today. And so if we have a request is to have a reflection between member states to address this issue, because it's an important one. So could we try to simplify the requirements, accept much more broadly the packs which are not from the original country? One of the options that we are looking at Vaccines Europe at is the possibility of using the e-leaflet in these cases. So what we could imagine is that to be compliant with the legislation, we have the paper leaflet in the original box, but we use the e-leaflet in the different languages to at least allow the transfer, the easy transfer of doses between countries.
Thank you. Belen?
Thank you. My name is Belén Escribano. I work at the Spanish Medicine Agency, and I would like to comment in 3 issues. The first one is about the information to patients that both Francois and Aoife just commented. For national competent authorities, it's very important not only to have a good system to receive notification, but also to communicate them. I would like to share with you that in Spain, for the last 3 years, all the information we have in our website is connected with the programs they have at the pharmacy. So when a patient goes and there is a prescription that they cannot fill, automatically the information arrives on the screen. So it's possible to inform the patients why we have this shortage, for how long time, and which are the alternatives. Sometimes there are medicinal products that can be substituted by the pharmacies. In other cases, there are a foreign medicinal product available, but it's not very complicated at all. It's quite easy. So it's just a thing to agree between the Council of Pharmacists and the national competent authority. So there is I would say, an easy solution for that. Then something I would like also to comment, because we have been talking about new medicines, but very little about old medicines, but they have been there also in some presentations. And I would say that that's rather a big problem for national competent authority, that we receive information about all medicines that have a good efficacy, a good profile of safety, and maybe not thousands of patients, but hundreds of patients that are using them. And suddenly we receive 2 months before the withdrawal a communication saying that that medicinal product will be no longer in our market, and that has a high impact on patients. And for that, I would like to mention both to FPA and IGA to consider national competent authority when taking these decisions. Because sometimes what we are told is something that's coming from headquarters, mainly at another continent, and there's nothing to do about that. So if there was an early communication, we should really speak about that and try to look for solutions, because sometimes we may find another manufacturer that is willing to continue with the manufacturing of that product, and it will be very, very, very needed for us to have a very early communication on this. And a last comment about the safety features from February. I know the Commission is here, maybe Agnes would like to comment something about it, but I can tell you that from national competent authority perspective, we really want to have a safer supply chain, but with no impact at all on shortages. And that solution that was proposed about having the leaflets and being able to have vaccines that have been packaged in another language will be perfectly fine for us. The only thing that we always assess when we have this kind of changes is to see that the right information that is easy to understand for the healthcare professional is there. But otherwise, it will be fine for us to use this kind of solution, because the last thing we want in February is to have more shortages because of the safety features. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Joan Pepper from European Association of Hospital Pharmacy. There were two presenters, I think, mentioned the Falsified Medicines Directive as well as Brexit in the context of shortages. So my question is really directed to Agnes. Has there any risk assessment? I know that an incredible amount of work is ongoing by all parties to ensure that the Falsified Medicines Directive implementation will not affect the supply chain. And I see that myself in hospital pharmacy at local, national and European level. But I am wondering, at the time of that legislation, Brexit was not happening. And I'm wondering, has the Commission undertaken any risk assessment on the impact of allowing two major challenges to the medicine supply chain to happen in the 12-month period?
Thank you. Who else wants to take the floor? Yeah.
So thank you. I would like to react on the comments by the Netherlands, but first I take note the comment from Spain. Thank you, and we will follow up internally. With respect to the comment from the Netherlands, I would clearly state from a EFPA perspective that proposal to change the status quo to require marketing in all member states would run counter to the very principle of the centralized marketing authorization and internal market of free movement and trade. This is one point, but the next one is that requiring marketing authorization in all member states would certainly be disproportionate unless the manufacturers were given the choice to determine the geographic coverage of their centralized marketing authorization, given the obligation which will put on them to serve the various markets. So you need to really reflect, when you put those proposals, what could be the consequences. So we consider that there are less extreme and restrictive measures to address market access issues than this type of proposals. Thank you.
I think
I'm also not sure. I'm not so sure that was the meaning of the intervention by the Dutch colleague. So, but perhaps can I first? Yeah, I'll give the floor to other persons.
I think it was a different question, François. It was not that one.
So can Birte, can you perhaps rephrase your point?
I'm always happy if the EMA interpreted my. Thank you, Noel. No, the point was, and I think we're on the same line. The point was, and it was not only. I liked the overview of FBA, but in relation to the sunset clause, so the overview you presented is much more on the centralized procedures only. So the sunset clause is both in the regulation and in the directive, meaning also for old products, so via the MRP DCP. Nevertheless, I think the sunset clause is a very tricky instrument, legal instrument, if you look at marketing authorization holders who are not bringing their product for more than 3 years on the market. If it's a centralized or an MRP or a DCP, whatever, it is not helping to prevent or to prevail shortages. That was my point, and that was why I addressed it to the European Commission. So my point was not only related to centralized procedures. But I think we are on the same line.
In that regard, I think from the Medicines for Europe perspective, looking at it from that perspective, I think it would be a worthwhile discussion. I can think of a specific case of an anti-infective for a rise of sexually transmitted disease that had gone down and then resurged, let's say. And that product had been available in Europe, and then there were no more sales in Europe of that product, and then the manufacturer continued to sell it outside of Europe, but no longer within Europe. And suddenly a member state came and said, I need that product. And of course, it was a very complicated procedure to bring that product, which was manufactured, previously available, back into the European market. And so having some kind of understanding, some kind of approach, it's not just a shortage problem, it can be an availability problem. Just to the point on Belen, you touched on, I think, a problem which is there and which will probably, unfortunately, grow because of the manufacturers are looking today for precisely those type of products, the cost of FMD, other things like that, and are making, unfortunately, some of those choices. Those are at central manufacturing level, and they will probably be communicated. And I would agree we should probably, but it's very, very difficult. How do you compile a list of these products and then do an assessment of the manufacturers? It's a very difficult situation. I think for a lot of older anti-infectives, we're going to be in this situation if we see certain restrictions on prescribing, which is understandable. But then who's going to supply those products at today's prices if you go from today's volume to almost nothing? These are going to be difficult questions, but we are open to a discussion if we can try and define and clarify what that could be. Indeed, there could be some smaller players who might be interested in picking up those opportunities, but it would also require a different discussion around pricing and reimbursement as well. But I agree, it's probably going to be a problem over the short term, actually. And we should probably find a way to discuss those concerns.
The lady at the end, yes.
Viorica Cursaru, Maeloma Euronet, Romania. When it comes to marketing authorization for authorized medication by EMEA, the situation in the Eastern European countries, it's even worse. The marketing authorization takes ages, sometimes measurable in years. Now, I have a kind request for the Commission. We are not. I do not know people whom I talk to, and I recently attended a regional meeting in the Balkans. I'm talking about the member states in the Balkans. They are all confronted with the same situation: shortages of medication, of approved EMA medication. So the question is there any possibility to shorten the period for the marketing authorization? Because most definitely I understood that a centralized marketing authorization, it is not yet possible. And I fully understand that. But somehow a kind of regulation could be delivered by the Commission, whereby the member states, the competent authorities will be not forced, I don't want to use this term, will have to grant marketing authorization in due time as to enable the patients to benefit from those medication. Thank you.
Yeah, there are many questions and we are running out of time, so that's my problem. The UK colleague, is that, no, not UK, you're not UK. No, okay, sorry.
It's Caspar Ernest from the EAEPC. I represent the parallel traders in Europe. I just want to comment on the presentation from Eurodis, sorry. Is that how you, yeah, my apologies. First and foremost, it is unacceptable to have just one shortage because of parallel export. I think historically our members have not been fully aware of the few cases where they have been a cause of the shortage. In many instances in countries such as the Czech Republic, we do actually even buy medication from the manufacturer themselves, and in such situations, as an example, you presume as the buyer that they will have fulfilled first their legal obligation to supply the national markets. In other situations, we buy it from wholesalers and so on, and there we are committed to have more due diligence in the future on our side. That's also why you will see we are so preoccupied later on today with finding a good definition of shortages so that we know what is in shortage and that we can check against the lists of shortages and make sure we don't export that. We also welcome countries with systems such as in Spain and in Greece where, let's say, intelligent export restrictions have been put in place so that we do not export what is in shortage, but at the same time we do have the free flow of goods for products which are not in shortage, because we do also every day for many countries around Europe provide imports of medicines which are in shortage in that given country with an excess supply in another country. So we really appreciate a discussion which is proportionate and balanced, and we also welcome the paper of 28 May from the Commission, where it set out how we can make such a system. And we are trying internally now to define better a framework on how we can do this, to have a coherent response to this issue from our side. So we are really committed to work much more in the future to address this issue in a let's say proportionate and balanced way. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give now the floor to the European Commission to reply to a number of issues raised, and then we have to close this session.
Thank you. I will try to answer one by one, even though I'm not sure that they have all the answers. The first point on the risk management plan in the context of pharmacovigilance, whether it could cover shortage in the future. This is something that we have never considered so far. We have more considered for the member states that manufacturers should have a risk management plan or contingency plan to make sure that if there is an interruption due to a GMP problem, the company, the manufacturer should have an alternative solution or something to mitigate the risk that we discuss. But it's an interesting comment. The sunset clause, I have understood the point. It's more the idea that a company has made the investment to receive the marketing authorization. It does not place on the market during 3 years. And it would be really a pity that after 3 years we withdraw this marketing authorization because there may be a need in the future. I really welcome the suggestion. I think it deserves a reflection. In particular with my colleagues in the Commission and with the Member States to see how it can be reflected in the light of the legislation. So this is something that I will report. We have the Pharmaceutical Committee, we have the STAM, as I mentioned, where we could table this discussion. The French platform, so indeed France is quite advanced with a number of initiatives. So for example, they have a legislation that the company should notify 1 year in advance the interruption. They have a contingency plan for manufacturer. There are a number of good practice that we have identified, but other member states have also measures, and it's the reason why we did a survey where we compile all this information in a report and we share that with all member states. But it brings me to the discussion that we will have at a later stage, the notification. I think it's an important point. And industry mentioned it also, the importance to harmonize what has to be notified. And so I bring that, your remark as a support that there is a need to have harmonized information and that there is a need to have good information to the patients. The vaccine, the flexibility for the multi-country pack to simplify the requirement. this is certainly something that we table regularly in the expert group on falsified medicine, and I'm sure that with Belen, if there is any room for improvement, we could also further discuss this specificity. The hospital pharmacy, I would like to say that for the falsified medicine legislation, we had two impact assessments, one in 2008 and another one a bit before 2011 for the implementing act. So we have assessed, we had a very in-depth risk assessment on where are the benefit risks, where are the costs. So we do not we have to recognize the cost in hospital for acquiring the scanners and to have the staff to decommission the pack. We did this impact assessment in the past, but we have to put it in the balance that today we have fake products that circulate in the EU. We have stolen products, and I think we wait. As long as we wait, we have also a bigger risk, which is the potential fake product reaching the patient. There are products stolen, those products will reintegrate the supply chain, and we need to launch this process of falsified medicine. And end-to-end verification has been considered as the most cost-effective approach, where the industry plays the safety feature, and at the end of the chain, the hospital pharmacist decommission. As we are aware of the cost for hospital, we in the working group, we have a subgroup which discuss specifically the possibility to have data file which could facilitate the decommissioning in hospital. 2 days ago, we discussed with Poland the possibility of structural fund, how a hospital could have possibly structural funds to acquire the scanners. I think we have to work now all together to make sure that we have this process launched in February 2019. But we do not underestimate the cost for all actors, but I think it's time to implement this legislation now. And then the possibility to shorten the marketing authorization procedures proposed by the Romanian colleague. I think for the marketing authorization process, there is the accelerated procedure in certain circumstances. I think the experience with the pandemic vaccine in the past was an example where we succeeded to accelerate the granting of the marketing authorization. It's not something that we can use for everything, but it is there are possibility to be reactive, even if I admit that the regulatory procedures are long. We have, in certain cases, possibility to accelerate. So I do not know if you refer to the marketing authorization procedure. If you refer to the reimbursement procedures, I think the cooperation on HTA will allow to have the HTA assessment in parallel to the authorization procedures. The horizon scanning may help in the future to see what will come on the market in the future. So it's a valid point how to make sure that we speed up the authorization and the reimbursement procedures in the future. But I think we try to put the action in place for those remarks.
Thank you, Anja. So we have to close this first session. I also understand from all the interventions made that we have a very complete picture and that no other issues were raised other than those that have already been highlighted in the various presentations. And we also have to take into account that the number of aspects that have been addressed cannot be addressed within the sphere of responsibilities of the joint task force, but then will have to be taken on board by other parts in the wider sphere, I would say, of stakeholders.